Here we are. What's happening? What's going on? Along with Dan Wiederer of the Chicago Tribune, I am Mark Grote of Chicago Sports Radio 670 The Score. We are pleased to have Dan Wiederer back and alive, and you look good, even though you had your bros down and you were hanging out in Wrigleyville. My friend Layla Rahimi, your friend as well, here at The Score, I just did a show with. She told me that she saw you at Vines and that you look good, that you look like you were in control, which kind of disappointed me, to be honest with you.
Oh, then I fooled her. I fooled her pretty well there in that setting at Vines. Yeah, after the game on Saturday. But it was a fun weekend, and Wrigleyville was alive on Friday, as you would have expected it to be for that first warm day of the spring. And Cubs Sox series there. The Cubs play some pretty good baseball. The White Sox play some really bad baseball, and I drank a lot of alcohol. So
Yeah, well,
what
that's
you do
good.
in the spring.
Good for you. Yes, it was a decisive sweep for the Chicago Cubs over the White Sox, but we'll leave the Cubs and Sox talk to the Cubs and Sox podcasters. This is going to be a fun one because Dan has not had a chance to discuss some of the hottest topics so far of this offseason, and that would be the now infamous book that Seth Wickersham of ESPN has coming out, from which there is an excerpt dealing with Caleb Williams and his father. We're going to get to that in a second because I can't wait to hear what Dan has to say about it, and I will refresh people on my opinions. Obviously, we'll go back and forth on it. The schedule came out.
It sure did.
So Dan, we've not heard what Dan has to say about that. We'll go through some of that. And then the stadium. It looks like Arlington Heights is going to be the place, unless they pivot again, unless there's some last second thing. It's starting to look a whole lot like Arlington Heights, but let's get into all of it. And Dan, why don't we start with the story from Seth Wickersham and his book, Wickersham. It was Wickersham, the book and the expert. And basically the headline, again, to refresh everybody, is that Caleb Williams' dad, didn't want Caleb Williams to go to the Bears. And Caleb Williams was even balking a little bit, desirous of going to the Minnesota Vikings at one time because he liked what they had going on there, which in some ways you can't blame him for. Ultimately, it was Caleb Williams who said, you know what? I can do this. I want to play for the Bears. And he played for the Bears last year. And that brings us to right now. Dan, your thoughts on this article?
Well, let's start here on a personal note, right? Like I scheduled this weekend with my buddies from North Carolina in the middle of May because as we're piecing together schedules, you're like, oh, it's going to be pretty quiet. It's going to be after the draft. It's going to be before OTAs. Like the schedule will be out. We're just, kind of cruising to the weekend and what could possibly happen. And then you mentioned the schedule release, which we knew about, this excerpt from Seth Wickersham's book, and then the stadium front. You miss a lot, Grote. And I felt sort of out of my element watching things blow up on my phone for 48 hours and not being able to react the way I normally would in my professional world, right? Like you want to get on your voice heard, you want to chime in on various topics. This one is weird for me because there's so much of it that is past news. And then you're trying to figure out how to interpret the relevant to now, right? It's like that whole so now what question, and what does it mean for Caleb Williams 2025? What does it mean for the Bears in 2025? And there aren't really convenient answers to those questions right now. And I think you and I probably are both very eager to hear from Caleb Williams at some time soon. If I was in charge of how to do things at Haugh Hall, I would recommend having Caleb Williams talk after Wednesday's OTA practice this week and just get this whole thing behind them as soon as possible. I think if you delay Caleb any more than that, you're just giving this oxygen, right? And it's going to go there. Grote, David and I used to play a game periodically on the Take the North podcast called How Big Is Your Headline? This is a great story for how big is your headline, because it's obviously a story. And then you're trying to figure out, is this going to be like front page of the paper, above the fold, biggest font you can find? Or is it just, hey, here's some things we learned about Caleb Williams joining the Bears. So I guess I'll throw that at you, and then I'll kind of try to give you some insight into how conflicted I am and how to process some of this.
When you say how big is your headline, so you want me to give you a headline, or
no? I'm saying like how big are, like, you get this story on Thursday, I guess it was, it comes out, like, where are you placing it in the old traditional newspaper form? Is it on page 7 of the sports section? Is it on A1 of the whole paper? How big is your headline?
The headline is huge, and I can even tell you what the headline would have been for me. Like we almost lost Caleb. Caleb was almost lost by the Chicago Bears. So it's a massive headline. And part of the reason is, and I understand that we knew a lot of this, like none of it should be necessarily shocking. I mean, maybe some parts of it, and we'll get to that. But the fact, like if Caleb did not come here or circumvented in some wild way some of the things that Carl Williams, his father, was talking about, I can't think of a bigger sports disaster for the city of Chicago ever. Like, I mean, there's been some horrible things that have happened in Chicago sports. I mean, we can make a list. That is for sure. We are not at a lacking for those, as are most cities. But that would have been, Bears lose the top pick, this generational quarterback who, and let's say, well, probably never would have happened that he would have ended up in Minnesota. But if he had like taken the year off or gone to another football league, that is the biggest sports story maybe ever in the city, considering how important the Chicago Bears are to people.
Yeah, I mean, so you have essentially chronicled how this could have been one of the biggest disasters in Chicago sports, and they somehow sidestepped that pothole, that line.
Yeah,
that landmine.
Yeah. So to some degree, Dan, it's like we should be celebrating that he did decide to come here.
You start reading the thoughts of like going to play for the UFL so that then you could take a year and then choose your destination. And you realize how serious the Williams worries were about this entire situation. I think the worries were documented in real time back in the spring of 2024. I think they were real. I think what's troubling to me about the whole thing is that the worries that the Williams family had all came true, right? Like they didn't want to join an organization that had, institutional dysfunction, this whole track record of instability, and they didn't want to be part of the instability. And then in Caleb Williams' rookie season, they fire the hand-selected offensive coordinator in November, and they fire the head coach 3 weeks after that. And you're just like, oh my God, like where this becomes a present day story for me is you have to figure out a way to recreate trust, right? And part of that was in the hiring process that they went through in January and pairing Caleb up with Ben Johnson and hoping that then assures him that he can get his career relaunched the right way. But I think what bothered me the most about just kind of revisiting things that we didn't know and things that we already knew is that it's just another illumination of how this organization is so consistently clumsy in situations like this, right, Grote? And so like you're working through a history in a situation where you're like, man, like when the star quarterback in the draft where you're picking number one doesn't want to play for you, or at least has questions before he decides, yes, I'm going to do this. And, or as in Seth Wickersham's words, like decides not to light the match with the gas leak out there, right? Like you've got issues and like we've talked for decades about the issues here in this organization. And this was just another reminder of how real they are, how the perception of them is created in the outside world. And yes, Caleb did come here and sign up and play in his rookie season, but then he was subjected to a lot of disruption and distraction and everything else that we've chronicled. And it just leaves you unsettled because you realize that, wait a minute, while they may have given Ben Johnson a mop and a bucket and said, clean this up, it ain't cleaned up yet. Right. No. Like, and they've got to figure out a way to get this thing cleaned up. And so that process is ongoing. It's an oil spill really that they're still trying to get cleaned up.
It really is. I mean, that's a great point because a lot of people that are pushing back on the story. So I'm not trying to make it sound like everybody's like, stop talking about this, but there are a decent amount of people who are like, that was the past. He's here now. Well, the problem with that is what went on last year put him behind. It stunted his growth. He's in a place right now, and hopefully we could ask him about this if he is to be made available on Wednesday. But the whole thing about not learning how to watch film properly, like here it is. I've turned to page 4 in my missalette. At times, Williams said he would watch film alone with no instruction or guidance from the coaches. No one tells me what to watch, Caleb Williams told his dad. And Caleb Williams went on to say, I just turn it on. So there are rudimentary, basic things that didn't get squared away. And here we have Ben Johnson. Again, one of the things that he will talk about physically with Caleb Johnson is footwork. Here we go again with footwork. And I understand that that's an ongoing process, and maybe they were working on that with him, but there are basics, things that got stunted because of the poor coaching, the poor selection of the coaches, and the poor coaching. And what really makes me most angry about it, Dan, is I go back to Hard Knocks, and I was saying this in real time while it was going on, that they went out of their way to, in just about every episode, to show Matt Eberflus coaching this guy and sitting in an office with him. And for the record, they were looking at video at times. Now, there might have just been still shots, and maybe that was all. It turns out it probably was all show for the camera. Well, I knew it was BS then, and now I know more than ever that it was. I mean, it pissed me off then, and it makes me even more angry now that it's confirmed that Matt Eberflus had nothing to do with watching tape with Caleb Williams, nor did Shane Waldron, as we're learning now.
Well, and I think you and I talked previously about how we didn't see Shane Waldron very much during Hard Knocks, and it was like, should we make a more of a note of that than we need to, because it's weird that the guy that they hand selected to help get the quarterback launched wasn't being prominently displayed in that way. We've heard from Ryan Poles that there were compatibility issues. I will say this is a two-way street. And if you're a rookie quarterback drafted number 1 overall to play in the National Football League, you've got responsibilities also. And if you don't know how to watch the film, you need to get your ass into the office at 7:00 in the morning and say, guys, like, I hate to tell you this. I don't know what I'm looking at. Right. And so this is where this marries up with some of the things that we've heard from Ryan Poles since last season ended about Caleb learning to be a professional quarterback in the NFL. Right. And trying to develop work habits that go along with the work ethic that then produce results. And so, like, I'm not going to sit here and give Caleb Williams 100% lenience on this, because if you weren't getting what you needed, you're the most important person in that entire building. You need to let them know what you need, and you need to be very adamant about it, and you need to express it. Maybe he did. And maybe these are some of the questions that we need to ask Caleb next time we talk to him is, what did, when you came to that realization, what were your troubleshooting methods? Right. Because, you and I heard later in the season from Kerry Joseph, from Thomas Brown, about things that they wanted Caleb to focus on going into year 2, right? Like the things of trying to compartmentalize and not to try to tackle too much at once, and to make sure that you're focusing on this first. And before you give yourself clearance to go to the next stage, make sure you've mastered this first, And so, like, there is a process to this. There's an educational process where the teaching obviously wasn't done at the level it needed to be done, but the learning wasn't done at the level it needed to be done early, because if it was, that would not have been a part of this story here. It would have been like, oh man, like, I've got to learn how to do this. Again, Case Keenum was also signed here a couple months ago to be a veteran person in the quarterback's room that a young quarterback like Caleb Williams can lean on. Last year, he's sitting with Tyson Bagent and Austin Reed, neither of whom have the experience or probably at this stage of their careers the bandwidth to be able to be a compass for Caleb Williams. And so, that is, again, it's a two-way street there. And I think what bothers me about the organizational instability on this front is, look, like, I did a big story leading into the season last year. I don't remember if it ran right before training camp or right after training camp, about all of the things that Ryan Poles had put thought into in terms of getting Caleb Williams' career launched properly. And in retrospect, it wasn't that Ryan hadn't thought of any of this stuff. It's just that all the answers he came up with were wrong. He picked the wrong offensive coordinator, decided that Ryan Griffin was going to be the veteran resource in the quarterback's room to help bring Caleb along, decided to marry him up with a defensive-minded coach who a lot of people knew in real time was going to be in win or else, situation in the rookie season of a franchise quarterback. And so it's like, man, they didn't just like kind of overlook some of this stuff. They looked deeply into it and then made all the wrong decisions. And so that's one of those things where you're like, ugh, where does that put your faith in things going forward as they try to get it restarted with Ben Johnson and company?
You had the wrong damn guys developing, in theory, the best quarterback prospect that you've ever had. And there is no excuse for that whatsoever. And if you want to bring like Trace Armstrong into this from the beginning with Matt Eberflus and all of that, then you have to say too that there was some naivete on the part of wrong decision and getting taken. And hopefully, as time goes on, that he will start to, for lack of a better way of putting it, do his homework a little bit more deeply, as opposed to just taking the word of others or just getting sort of coaxed into doing something. I want to also go back to what you were saying, because it's a great point about this does not excuse Caleb Williams. Like you said, that the part about, and you and I have been talking about this for a long time, that Caleb needs to learn how to be a professional, that he did all the right things. He was good with the media. He's a professional in terms of speaking to the media, but like in terms of being a quarterback in this league, for sure. It also said, and I've been saying this, Dan, it doesn't excuse every wrong decision he made on the field either. It's not like all of a sudden, well, okay, this article came out and Shane Waldron was not the right fit. Matt Eberflus was not the right fit. The entire staff was not the right fit. There were plenty of times on the field where Caleb Williams made mistakes or made poor decisions or did things that he should have known better. So, no, this doesn't completely alleviate. It gives a little bit more excuse to Caleb Williams, but certainly not completely off the field or on the field.
In the NFL offseason, you get this door of hope that opens up and hope comes flooding in, right? And that's what we've experienced in Chicago over the last several months with all the additions from the coaching hirings to the trades to the free agent signings to the draft. What you're left remembering through this sort of portal of looking at it is that it ain't all fixed, and it ain't even close to fixed, and that there's a lot of work to get it all fixed. And that's a really heavy lift. I tell people all the time that to be a successful, successful NFL quarterback, it's the degree of difficulty higher than the highest one you can think of, right? Like that's why there's only like 6 every generation that come close to even meeting the standard of doing these things. And so for Caleb Williams to clear that bar, he has to do a lot of things right here in the next 2 or 3 years. He's got to be paired with the right people, but we're so far from there. And I think there's been this sentiment of, oh, Ben Johnson's hired, it's all fixed. And this was a reminder, and we can get into the schedule in a few minutes, that like, buckle in, sports fans, because like this is not necessarily going to be the express lane to the glory that Chicago wants it to be again, right? Like that we've done this so many times where it's like, okay, we're back on track. And it's like, are you? Like, do we know that yet? And when you see this with Ben Johnson having to do this cleanup process, you realize how daunting it is. I do walk away from those excerpts from that book also thinking like, Caleb Williams walked into Chicago with his trust lowered, right? Like he didn't necessarily trust the Bears. He didn't necessarily trust the coaches. He didn't necessarily trust the organization. And when your trust is lowered to that degree, your ceiling is lowered also, right? Like, because at the first hint of struggle or adversity, you're going to be like, yeah, see, I knew my gut was telling me that this wasn't quite right. And now all of a sudden, like you're kind of in a different psychological mind frame. And so that's what they've got to change. And there's so much that needs to get changed and get fixed. And it's like, it's just a reminder to me, like, oh God, like this year, I think I said this a couple months ago, is supposed to be what last year is supposed to be. Right? You know what I mean?
Yeah,
right? Like,
yes.
And so then it's so depressing that entire year was wasted. And so now it's like, now you've got to make the climb from last place into like the middle. We're competing for a playoff spot. The quarterbacks seems to be on the right track. All the things, checkpoints that should have been cleared in 2024 weren't cleared. And now you've got to go back and clear them to get to the stage that everyone wants to be at and that the Bears should be at, but they're not. And now, like, good luck navigating this road.
Right. And this is, and I'll give a shout out to our friend Carmen Vitale, who was on The Score doing a show with us today. And she backs up what you're saying. You don't go from being dysfunctional to functional overnight. That is the case, and that's what the Bears are going to be dealing with.
Like what
this
Grote,
year?
What do you think Ben Johnson's initial reaction to this stuff was last week? When, like this has nothing to do with him, but now it has everything to do with him. So like when this comes out and it's brought to his desk, what do you think his reaction was to seeing all this?
I think that part of him welcomes it, and stick with me here on this, and that is because what he has said is that he wants to rip this thing down to the studs. He has talked about wanting to a do-over from the season even before this article came out, to like, we're going to do things differently, we're going to do it my way, just in terms of getting the basics down. So I think that it further empowers him to do what he wants to do and say, forget everything that happened last year. Like, there's nothing that Caleb Williams can take from I mean, I'm sure there are some things, but there's really nothing big that he can take from last year. He can clean the slate. He doesn't have to worry about, comparisons to other coaches and good things he did. Caleb Williams is ready to throw it all out. So actually, I think that this probably put Ben Johnson, ironically, in a bit of a comfort zone. And what you just said, it wasn't on my watch. That wasn't on my watch.
Right. What I love, and I've said it before, is that Ben's history in Detroit is a good history to lean on, because Detroit was dysfunctional forever, and Detroit had the reputation as they can't get out of their own way and they're never going to be anything. And then they became something, and now they, like Ben watched that, from the ground up. He was there when Matt Patricia was fired. He watched Brad Holmes and Dan Campbell do what they've done here. And so I think that will help give him a little bit of a roadmap on how to navigate some of this stuff and to be strong and firm and confident with his messaging, we'll hear from him. We know we will hear from him on Wednesday at Haugh Hall. And this is unfortunately going to be something that probably dominates the conversation with him, because you do need to get some thoughts on how he's going to navigate some of this. It is noise, right? But it's real noise. And so now, as an organization, as a coach, as a quarterback, how do you quiet the noise? The only way to truly bring it down to a peaceful volume is to go win a bunch.
Yeah.
And to get there, the amount of work that needs to be done is absolutely massive.
Yeah. And it also, because Caleb wanted to go play in Minnesota with Kevin O'Connell. How about this now? So you've got the Ben Johnson, Matt LaFleur thing going on, where he enjoys beating Matt LaFleur twice a year. You've got the Minnesota Vikings, whom the Bears will open up their season against. That was the place. Like right off the bat, lights. There's not going to, even though you're right, Dan, there's going to be growing pains, and we're going to have to, this might be a developmental year in a lot of ways still. You almost can't lose that first game against the Vikings. I mean, it's crazy to think about what the buildup will to that be, and the questions that Caleb will be asked. And if he loses to them, is he going to be asked about Kevin O'Connell? And then we get to the Matt LaFleur, the Green Bay games. They've set themselves up for some pretty stressful weeks at Haugh Hall, and games on Sundays or Mondays, is the case.
But that's it. But and that goes back to our previous conversation about Caleb. You have to understand now, you may get the rookie year lenience and grace that you asked for. This is a big boy job. And again, to the degree of difficulty of being a successful NFL quarterback, you remember that TV show Wipeout that was on for a while, where it's people would be running across some slippery tube, and then a fist would come out of a wall and knock it. That's playing
great
quarterback
Saturday
in the
night
NFL.
show. Yeah,
that's playing quarterback in the NFL, right? You never know where that thing's going to come from. But in order to get across that course, you better be alert and agile and able to adapt. And we'll see. We'll see how they are. I had someone ask me over the weekend, would you classify this as drama? And I thought about it for a few minutes. And I actually would classify this as drama. I wouldn't classify it as high level drama, but this is drama. And drama in a football building sucks. And you have to be able to manage the fatigue of drama. And I think the Bears are going to have to find a way to do that. It's May. It doesn't really come at a time where there's a lot of other stuff challenging them, but this is a thing these are flames that have to be doused and extinguished in a way that makes the entire building feel like you've got full buy-in, right? When you've got the face of your franchise basically on record with his father saying, well, we didn't want to be here at the start. Okay. Do you want to be here now? And how do you convince us all that you want to be here now and for the long haul? And how can we help you become the player that we think you're going to be? Because there's a lot on the line for a lot of people.
Yeah. And I'll just say, and we'll move on to the schedule, I'll be very surprised if Caleb doesn't speak Wednesday. I think they'll get it all out of the way. I do believe Caleb will speak.
Would you be disappointed if he doesn't?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, well, I'd be like, well, okay, so you're just putting off. Then it's going to be the following Wednesday. You know what I mean? Then
I agree with you.
If you want to keep putting it off, if you want to start that cycle up again in another week, I mean, I just think it'd be a huge mistake. So I'd be very surprised if the Bears are already planning to have him available.
You've been through this before, right? You've worked at Haugh Hall. You know that a legitimate possibility, right?
Yeah, I do. I mean,
you know what I mean? And we're gonna walk out of there Wednesday afternoon being like, did they really just give this another week or two of life by not dusting it away right now?
Right. Because this is a story that I will allow.
It's a national story.
It's a national story, but it's okay for it to go away once they have spoken and we've gotten answers. And then it's always going to be kept in the back of our minds. And leading up to the Vikings game, there might be questions to be asked, but it's not like this is something that I want to stay on a daily basis. I'm all for the Bears bringing everybody out, letting us ask all the questions we want for a decent amount of time. And then, of course, we're going to talk about them the next couple of days, but then there'll be a pause. There'll be a pause in the action. And I would be just as okay with that, I think, as the Chicago Bears would be.
Yeah. We'll see. We'll see what they do this week.
You're not buying it. You're not buying it. That's okay, man. You're only slightly more jaded than I because of your extra 7 or 8 years covering than I have.
I mean, I've seen some things over the years, and
I know you have, brother.
I go back to that Thanksgiving patch.com week where it was how does a charter franchise in the National Football League not understand how to skate
Well,
this
yeah, I
week.
mean, it just happened this last year with Flus with the Zoom thing, with him
Yeah.
Zooming with us and the delay.
There you go.
Here he is, and then he goes upstairs and he gets canned.
It's happened with Flus, with Alan Williams. It's happened. There's a 100 examples of things that just haven't been really gracefully handled, and they're gonna have to figure out how to gracefully handle this. And the quarterback's voice means something to this topic because this is a lot of words put in his mouth, a lot of sentiments put in his orbit, and he has to clarify those, right? Like he has to, and it has to come soon.
Of course. All right, on to the schedule, Dan. I've talked about it a decent amount on the score, and with Studs and I went through some of the games. We went through all the standalone games and actually picked those games. But your observations on this year's Bears 17-game schedule?
So I got a few different ones that I've written down here. Obviously, when we got the news last week that they were opening in primetime against the Vikings, you kind of sit up in your chair and you go, okay, let's go. Divisional game on the spotlight, right? Like in Chicago, where the anticipation will be building the entire summer, all week, all through Labor Day weekend, all through the following weekend, and you'll get ready to play the Vikings in a game that means a lot. And then you go to week 2 for Ben's homecoming to Detroit, and you're like, okay, like you want to see where you stand in this really tough division? How about you open with the 15-win team and the 14-win team, right? Like, and see where you stand, And so that's tough right out of the gates for the Bears to navigate. Two things that jumped out at me was I know you mentioned the early bye week strikes you, and I was like, ooh, that's, week 5 of the early October, not ideal. That puts you in a 13-game closing stretch where you got to play really good football. Most teams love that bye coming toward the middle part of the season, better reset timing. But Ben Johnson was on with Colin Cowherd last week and sort of leaning into this early bye week. And I'm sure some of it is just coaching psychology to not let guys think about it the wrong way. But he's like, look, like usually as a football team gets itself steady in the first month of the season, 4 weeks of games is a good point to know who you are and who you aren't. And that's the point to step back and sort of recalibrate and do some things. So I'll follow the coach's lead on this one, even though I personally feel like that's a really early bye week. Maybe Ben's got a formula for making that be a real reinvention week for them.
Well, look, that's one of the things that I've said is that teams there's always going to be some sort of justification once your bye week comes along. There might be guys that are on the injured list and they can get healthy, but yeah, ideally, if you could choose, you wouldn't want it that early. One thing though that I like about the start to the schedule, hosting the Vikings at the Lions, is that we don't have to wait until week 11.
Yeah, right.
For a division game. Like that was
just into the North.
Yeah. It was ridiculous. And I also think that this year, and I know like all of last year turned out to be a gauntlet of a season because they did lose 10 in a row, but you got some tough stretches in theory, and I understand things can change. But last year, once week 11 started, dude, it was on. You had Green Bay, Minnesota, at Detroit, at San Francisco, at Minnesota, home against Detroit, Seattle game, then at Green Bay. This year, you look at it, and I'd look at weeks 8 and 9 where you've got at the Ravens, at the Bengals, but then along comes a nice little softener with the New York Giants in week 10. You do have a pretty tough stretch starting in week 11 at Minnesota, host the Steelers, at Philadelphia on Black Friday, at Green Bay. But then just when you're getting worked up, in come the Cleveland Browns for a nice noon game at Soldier Field. So it doesn't feel, in terms of a stretch of games, Dan, and maybe you feel differently, it doesn't feel to me like there's a stretch of games in theory like there was last year.
Well, we'll see. And like all these teams kind of reinvent themselves year over year. Brad Biggs, my colleague at the Tribune, pointed something out that's like jarring when you look at it. The Bears will walk out of Soldier Field after playing the Cowboys on the evening of September 21st. And between then and December 13th, that's a long period. It's almost 3 months long. They will only have 3 home games, right? It's the Saints game, the Giants game, the Steelers game. Between the bye week and all that middle crammed road schedule, that's going to challenge them significantly. The other part about it is when you look at their road opponents this year, which we knew long before the schedule came out, I mean, find me the relief on the road, right? Like you're going to go to Baltimore and Cincinnati in back-to-back weeks. Good luck with that. Yeah. You've got that, you mentioned the back-to-back Eagles and Packers week, even though the Packers week will be a longer week after Black Friday. San Francisco on the road, the Lions on the road, obviously. This is a challenging road schedule that they're going to have to navigate gracefully. And I think a lot of us that did the exercise last week of kind of win-loss, figuring it out right now in the spring version of this, we're kind of doing it with a lean towards like, oh man, I want to find that 9th win. I ended up putting them at 9 and 8 in my initial schedule prediction.
Okay.
But like you're going through it and you're like, it takes some effort to find that 9th win. It feels like 7 or 8 when you go through it and you're like, I'm giving them the benefit of the doubt because the alternative is kind of bleak, but that road schedule gets you. It bites on you a little bit, and they're going to have to figure that out. Again, look, like, this comes back to the whole Ben Johnson is a first-time head coach, right? Like, what is his philosophy for a Black Friday game?
Yeah.
How do you set up your schedule for a Friday game, which has never been done in the history of the Chicago Bears playing on Friday, I don't think. We may have to check with our buddy Kevin Fishbane to make sure that's indeed accurate. But like, right, like what's the formula for that, and how do you get there in a way that is smooth and by the way, you're playing the Super Bowl champs in that Black Friday game?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and I will say that I did find 9 and 8 as well somehow.
Found it.
Yeah, there it was, and the Bears are going to be 9 and 8. One thing I did like is that although the Bears do have 5, as we say, standalone games, they've got 3 primetime night games.
Yeah,
I'm cool with that. Like, I think that's because I still think of the night games isolated on your own night or your own day as the biggies. They didn't get overboard with the Bears, and I thought that they might just because of the Ben Johnson, Caleb Williams factor. I'm good. I'm comfortable with those 5 games and specifically the 3 night games.
Yeah, it's interesting. I took note of that in real time on last Wednesday, and it's like 3 primetime games, nothing on Thursday. Okay. So the lack of a Thursday game is basically replaced by that Black Friday game, which will indeed be the Bears' first ever Friday game, according to our stud producer, Adam Studzinski. And so like you have you have that Friday game, and then you have that Saturday game against the Packers in December that feel like different stage games. So, okay, the Bears are on these stages. We'll see how they adapt to it. Another thing I always like to look at is, like what do the quarterbacks look like of the teams that you're going to face? And well, I wrote this down. You got 2 Super Bowl winners on your schedule. You got 3 others who have played in a Super Bowl. You've got a 2-time MVP in Lamar Jackson. You've got 8 guys on your schedule, 8 opposing quarterbacks who have had at least one season where they've thrown for 4,000 yards and 30 touchdown passes, which would both be Chicago Bears franchise records. And so this is a pretty daunting quarterback schedule as well, with, Jaden Daniels and Goff and Lamar and Burrow and possibly Aaron Rodgers if he
maybe
comes.
JJ McCarthy will be great.
Yeah, like there's some things here to navigate. I believe it was Sharp Analytics, perhaps, who took the opponent projected win totals and said that the Bears had the 7th hardest schedule in the league based on what their opponents' projected win totals are for 2025. So that's an indicator of like how steep and treacherous this climb will be in Ben Johnson's first year, in the reboot year for Caleb Williams. Man, like you go from hopeful to anxious really quick when you start to turn, the magnification of that microscope up, which obviously we'll do little by little as we get towards that week 1 starting gate.
I like that phraseology. It's a reboot year. That's what it is. It's perfectly put as a reboot. Oh, who do you think, by the way? Last question about the schedule. We got to get into the stadium and get out of here. Yeah. But who will be quarterbacking for the Cleveland Browns in Week 15 against the Chicago Bears? Because they have many.
What a wheel to spin there. Is it Flacco? Is it Pickett? Is it Gabriel? Is it Shador? How many are still on the roster?
Yeah,
is Deshaun Watson still around? Probably not.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go with Flacco. I'm gonna say Flacco.
I'm going Sanders because I think at that time they will have just caved into the public pressure. Like people are going to want him nationally, probably even in Cleveland. Like at that time they're just going to be screw it unless somehow, some way they have a decent season, which I am not predicting for the 3 and 14 Cleveland Browns. So I think Sanders, and that's fun to say too.
Fun to look at, yeah.
So we will continue to track the schedule and everything that pertains to that. But there is also even more news at the end of last week, and the headline is that the Bears, according to your paper, your Chicago Tribune was first on this, and that was that the Bears are shifting their focus from the downtown site to Arlington Heights. Dan, what do you make of that?
Yeah, first out, I'm going to give a shout out to my colleagues at the Tribune, Bob McCoppin, Jeremy Gorner, Dan Petrella, Alice Yin, and Andrew Carter, who combined on that story before the weekend hit. We should probably get somebody on at some point to kind of walk through some of the sort of the legislative and
Sure.
the other hurdles that the Bears are dealing with. This doesn't shock me based on the vibes that were there in Palm Beach at the owners' meetings with Kevin and George, sort of hinting that this was where all the momentum was pushing toward. There are not a lot of answered questions, though, either. And that leaves me a little bit hesitant about which direction this is going to go and how fast it's going to get there. You hear from, lawmakers in Springfield saying, what's with the timing of this? The spring legislative session is almost over. There needs to be all sorts of things passed down in Springfield in order for a project like this to have the momentum it needs to get going. But it seems like that dream of the lakefront is sort of disintegrated at this point, and now the Bears are going back to where they started. I always tell people, because it's written that the Bears, bought the property in Arlington Heights 2 years ago. Well, look, they entered into the purchase agreement June of 2021. Like we're coming up on the 4-year anniversary of this, and there has not been a lot of momentum or clarity on how this whole thing is going to come to life, and that is starting to give you a little bit of trepidation about how they're going to get it done. Project like this, obviously, the Bears are vowing to pay for massive amounts of the stadium costs, but the infrastructure, the tax certainty, all the things that come along with it, there are not a lot of questions, and it's not a great time to go down to politicians in government and be like, hey, we need money for a really rich sports franchise to build their stadium. So Kevin Warren and company are going to have to get out in front of that soon and try to convince first the people in Springfield and then the public that this is indeed moving along in a way that there will be a shovel in the ground before this year ends.
I heard one of the experts uttered, I think it was Mark Gannis, yeah, he thinks the shovel would be in the ground in 2025, but maybe early 2026. So
yeah, see, them goalposts keep on moving, right?
Oh,
like,
yeah.
And it's complicated, and look, like you understand the cost of a project like this, and like the stadium itself will be a $2 billion project. You go to Arlington Heights, you're talking about another $3 billion of multi-use development money that needs to come in to build everything else, right?
Yeah.
And then now you've got to go ask for $700 million of infrastructure for the roads and everything else around that complex to be workable for a mega venue like this. Sounds like there are some people in the Illinois state legislature that are trying to introduce some mega project legislation that would create some tax flexibility for the Bears. And if they can get some momentum behind that, great. But it's not like the whole state government is like, yeah, let's do whatever we can to lean in the direction of the Bears. There's a lot of issues that need to be figured out for a state that's undergoing a budget crisis to begin with. A lot of moving parts of this, a lot of layers, and a lot of unanswered questions that you were hoping by May 19th, 2025, you'd have more answers to.
Yeah, last thing I want to ask you, because I got into a little bit of a debate with Layla Rahimi and Marshall Harris on the score on this one. I do believe that Kevin Warren was serious about downtown, that he truly okay, so you agree that
I
he
do, yeah.
I mean, the points they were making, that was like, it was all like, of course, it always seemed to make more fiscal sense, and it would have been easier in a lot of ways to have it you own the property already. So a lot of it could have been a ploy to, get things more the way they wanted them financially. But Kevin Warren wanted that thing downtown badly. And this is, that he would not have put himself out there to take a loss publicly.
Kevin is a grand vision guy, and I think he truly believed, probably to a fault, that they could get more belief behind that project downtown than they did. And so, like, I do think the interest was real, and I think it just ultimately didn't get anywhere. And so now you're kind of back at this. It's like Caleb's rookie season. You're just like, okay, let's try this again, right? Like,
reboot.
Here we are again. Reboot. Let's try this again. You and I, we've been through too many reboots, right? Like, I don't want to have to call IT anymore. Like, this is getting embarrassing. Like, I know where Control Alt Delete is, and they're worn out. Like, you can't even read the ALT on the Alt key because I've been rebooting so much. But this is the state of this team, right? Like, I hate to be there again, where you're like, man, what a reminder of how much is ahead of this organization. Cleanup, building, steep climb, however you want to phrase it. Like, the Bears aren't magically fixed. There was no magic fix. And
No.
now it's up to the people that are in power now to fix it and to prove that they're different than everybody that's come before them. We'll see it. We'll believe it when we see it, I guess.
Dysfunction, believe it when you see it, all that stuff. And still everybody loves the Bears. God bless everybody. And we appreciate everybody who has been listening to this podcast.
I wrote that story in December about, should Ryan Poles save his job story, right? And like Mark Carman came in the media room one day and he's like, man, like you write so many of these, like the Bears are a mess again. Who needs to go and what exactly went wrong? And he's like, you're such a master at that. I was like, I would love to be a master of like how they built an NFC North champion one time, right? Like
I remember you in 2018. You were about as pumped up as anybody that year.
I mean, it's just easier and more fun to tell those stories than it is to constantly like plan the funeral, and like hopefully the Bears get on a trajectory to do that at some point. But like, it's just a reminder that they've been living in this state for a reason. And there's a lot of things that need to change to actually create change. And so we'll see where they go, man.
Yep. Amen,
we got
man.
Another busy year ahead.
Stand by, everybody. That's going to be a wrap for episode 339 of the Take the North podcast. For Dan Wiederer of the Chicago Tribune and Score contributor, he and I actually be hosting on the Score in the next Friday in life. So this coming Friday, he and I, 10 o'clock a.m. until 2 p.m. So we'll have plenty of Bears to talk about and whatever the hell else we feel like talking about. So I'm already looking forward to that. For our executive producer, Adam Studzinski, I am Mark Grote. Thank you so much for watching and listening to the Take the North podcast.
Great talk. See you out there.